Hey, welcome to the podcast. It's Joel here with my dad.
And I'm Rick. I'm glad to have you here today. What do you want to talk about?
Well,
Joel?
this March, we're doing this whole year is conquering mountains, right?
Uh-huh.
And I want to talk about this idea this month of seasons of life and how there's just, King Solomon, he says there's a time for everything. There's a season for everything, a time for every purpose under heaven. And when you get used to kind of those patterns and seasons, it kind of helps you. First of all, I think it helps you embrace life a little better because there's going to be seasons that are springy and happy and everything's green, and there's going to be dead seasons like this winter has been, kind of dreary, cold, and I'm over it.
Yeah.
But as you embrace every season, there's something to learn in every season. So I wanted to talk about kind of seasonal patterns because I remember, gosh, man, this was probably 20 years ago. I came to you and I was like, Dad, I just feel like my life is ruined. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And you were like, well, it's the winter. And it's just a hard time. And you talked about how you kind of get depressed in, is it January or?
New Year's for some reason. I get very contemplative just before the new year. And so I'm very insightful and contemplative for about a week. And then the new year comes and something else happens. I crash and burn. So.
You know, if you put the accent on that word differently, it makes you sound pretty profound. If you're a contemplative, people want to be that.
Yeah, I am for about a week.
Oh, no, but and then you lose it.
Headache and I go, oh, whatever.
All right, yeah. So you were like, well, essentially you'll get over it. And I did. But what I've come to realize is there are patterns for me, like for the longest time, August was a month where I just felt like this anger. It was this like low grade anger just sitting below the surface. And I started evaluating why. First of all, in Texas, it's like hotter than the 9th level of hell in Texas in August. I hate heat. So August is always hard for me. So I have to remind myself it's August coming up.
Yeah.
And, actually, there's data that shows that violent crime increases as heat increases.
Yeah.
So it would make sense. And they say the number one month for check-ins at mental hospitals, it tends to be August. I also think that's because that's the last month that your kids have been out of school all summer. And
So
you're just like,
it's all built up.
Send them back to school. Yeah. So August is a month that I've had to be really aware of. Another month is November. And I couldn't figure out why, but I for many years had this just deep depression that would come over me around November. So I started realizing these patterns. You helped me realize that it's every November. Actually, Kat, my counselor also, I called her one day and she's like, you always call me in November. And I was like, oh, I do. She brought up that pattern. She goes, and it's always the same thing. I'm like, oh yeah, that's true.
Interesting.
But realizing that has helped me figure out kind of how to schedule things to where I can kind of buffer that. So I know when August is coming, we plan some things to, short circuit, hopefully that. And then I also know in November, that's potential. I also have been feeling it a lot in February lately, which is interesting because February is really a busy month for me in terms of speaking and stuff. So basically half the year I'm a mess. No, just kidding.
I was thinking this is growing. Like next year it'll be July.
Yeah. And then there's May and June.
Yeah.
But
so like usually the 3rd of August I'm okay, but other than that I'm a mess.
Yeah, right. I'm good for
one day.
March is usually a good month for me.
Is it?
But anyway, I want to talk about this, recognizing the patterns of, first of all, the physiological things in us that cause us to get discouraged. Because, man, when you don't feel good physically, a lot of people right now are struggling with allergies I've talked to. And they're like, oh, I feel like the world's ending. Well, it's just because you got allergies. I actually heard a girl talking the other day that a doctor told her that certain allergens can actually make you suicidal.
Oh, really?
Where you actually have, there's certain things in the air that can make you feel so. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. So talk a little bit about kind of that revelation you shared with me that you need to identify your patterns and these patterns that lead to your, where you are mentally, spiritually, emotionally.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad vinyl is coming back in music because it's a great illustration that you can't use with CDs or anything like that.
Describe what vinyl is.
A record, a big piece of plastic that has little etches in it that when you put a needle on it, not a sewing needle, and you run it around in circles, it makes music. A record. And in a record, you're always really careful not to scratch it because if you scratched it every time the needle came, or every time the record hit that pleasure, and that is kind of what our life is like many times. That we are, we as a culture think of life and time as a line. Mm-hmm. Most cultures think of life and time as a circular thing. I come around again. I come around again. And that's what the record is like. It comes around again. And like I said, what you were mentioning, I noticed this with me, and that this was before you guys were born. We were, Mom and I were married, and I remember one year, like on New Year's Day, we had this huge fight over who knows what. I'm sure it was something very significant because I don't have any idea.
Because you still remember it. Oh wait, no, you don't.
I have no idea what it was about, but it was really horrible, And then the next year, we got over that and, made up whatever. And then the next year, New Year's Eve again, or New Year's Day. And I thought back, wow, I remember this last time we had this huge fight. We have another one now, and it's New Year's Day. And I have no idea why there was a etched point in that time of my life. But I realized then, okay, New Year's Day, I don't know why, but it was really a hard time for me. So as you said, I began preparing for that and just realizing, okay, chill out, guard yourself, keep cool, whatever's happening. And I don't know what brought it about, but for some reason in my record, there was a notch right there that when I got to New Year's Day. Now, for about 2 or 3 years after that, I had to really guard myself on that day, and now it's kind of gone away. I don't know, maybe I've gotten more inside the record and the scratch was on the outer side. I mean, you don't have the whole, I don't know what caused it, but I did definitely notice that there was that. And I've noticed there are even, we say this, I'm not a morning person. So even our days can have these, okay, I'm better at this time of the day than at this time of the day. I'm more alert. I'm more attuned. I'm a night person, whatever. And so daily there are these seasons, annually there are these seasons, and perhaps in all of our life, there are these seasons where we're going to be more productive. We're going to be less productive. Annually, we can see that with trees. In the spring, they're putting out flowers, putting out fruit. In the summer, they kind of slow down a little bit, and then in the winter, they begin to, they just die. They go dormant. And so we have those seasons as well.
That's a really good point, that it's on shorter time frames too, because I know for me, when I've spoken on a Sunday at our home church, I do 3 services on a Sunday. It's quite a bit of output of energy. If I don't take Monday as a Sabbath, I can't do Saturday as a Sabbath because I'm preparing a message.
Right.
But if I don't take Monday as a Sabbath, the rest, I'm not a good person to be around. And what I mean by Sabbath is I literally have to check out. And sometimes on Monday I'll be energized and want to do work, and I have to just hold it back. I'll make notes to myself on what to do. But I have to take that break, because when I've outputted that much energy, if I keep going and try and hit Monday like most people hit Monday, I can't do it. And then I start finding myself getting depressed. That's another thing I've noticed is Mondays are a bad day for me in terms of, feeling bad about myself. I'll be like, oh, I'm a horrible communicator or whatever, even if everybody's like, oh, the message was great. But I'll feel like, oh, I should have done this. I left this out of the thing. I should have covered this. And I've noticed that for pastors. I have to remind pastors all the time, just get ready, because Monday, whether it's exhaustion or whether it's the devil, I don't know. But it's probably a little combination of the both, right?
Yeah.
Mondays are going to be a hard day for pastors generally, I think, because of so much output of energy, if you're doing it right. And a lot of times pastors jump right back into it on Monday, but they've had no real Sabbath, right? So you got to figure out a day where you can get a real break. And if you don't have that, I feel like depression tends to set in for a lot of people. And some people, if they don't jump to it Monday, depression sets in. So they have to have their Sabbath. So you got to figure out those patterns of what works for you.
Well, you see that with Elijah too. If you remember Elijah after his confrontation with the prophets of Baal, man, he has this huge victory. You'd think he's going to be on the top of the world. I can do anything. And the next thing you know, he's depressed and sounding like he's suicidal. Oh God, I'm the only one left. Take me. I'm ready to die. And it's that once you've expended that emotional energy, it has to be recharged. I mean, even Jesus had to recharge. I mean, it's interesting. He's walking along, and a woman comes up to him, touches the hem of his garment. Who touched me? Who touched me? I felt virtue, which is another translation is power. I felt power go out of me. Whoa. You mean Jesus, like a battery, like we, got discharged. And that's why he would sneak away early in the mornings. Not sneak away, but while the disciples still sleep, he'd go out many times and they'd have to go find him. He's out. He's recharging, spending time with the Father. Yeah. And we all discharge like batteries, and we need to be recharged. And the world tries to do it through meditation and, hum and, all this sort of thing. I mean, they even realize it. But as a believer, our source of energy is plugging into the Father.
Yeah.
And that's where we recharge.
Which, I mean, the meditation thing, I mean, the Orthodox Christians believe that, they meditate on Lord Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. They find that word, the line.
Well, meditation is a biblical way of recharging.
Yeah.
It's not just meditating on some mantra or some word or some hum, emptying your mind. It's filling your mind, true meditations, filling your mind with the thoughts of God.
Yeah.
And then meditating on what that means and the application of that. And that's what's recharging for us, that quiet.
I talk about that in my book, Fully You, which is a book basically about spiritual disciplines. I talk about meditation as being basically Psalm 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor sits in the way of sinners, or stands in the way of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. On it he meditates day and night. He'll be like a tree planted by rivers of water. So it's that idea there's a constant stream coming to you when you're taking time to separate from the chaos. And I think sometimes we get addicted to chaos, which is why we want to go full force all the time. And sometimes I think we think something's happening just because we're staying busy, but it's easy to confuse a lot of activity for purpose.
I'm on the carousel, I'm going around. I must be making progress because I'm moving all the time. But all you're doing is going in circles. Yeah.
All right. So I just had this profound thought. I think it's profound. Maybe it's not.
Take a note. Write this down.
But you talked about it being like the record, right? And so you keep coming back around. One of the things that Kat, my counselor, she's come up twice in this conversation now. KatRussell.com, by the way, if you're looking for a great counselor. Yeah. She pointed out to me one time that grief is more like a spiral than a straight line. And you come back to the thing that happened a month, a year, 2 years later, and it hits you just as heavily as the day it happened. And you go, have I not gotten over this? But it's part of grief. But I wonder, you said after, and I found this too, Novembers don't hit me as hard anymore.
Yeah.
I wonder if it has something to do with grief. Like if you could trace it back to something that happened that month and like something traumatic, and you go back, and as you begin to recognize that the grief is there, it would make sense that it would come back around about that same time. For many years, right around Easter, I just did not like Easter, but that was something traumatic happened to me one Palm Sunday, right? And so
I remember a traumatic Easter where you punched a girl, and that was on an Easter.
Oh, that wasn't traumatic for me.
Well, it should have been.
Just kidding. That was traumatic. We've done a podcast episode on that before.
We did.
I was a kid. I didn't punch an adult female. Anyways, so all that to say, I wonder if it has something to do with grief, like that coming back around. Like if you had a challenging experience, and if you begin to recognize that, maybe you can help kind of divert the energy through that.
Well, I thought about that on that New Year's thing. I thought, well, maybe something happening, but I couldn't remember anything, and I didn't see a lot of value in going back to dig it up. Just be aware of whatever, because it could have happened. And again, I'm not saying maybe you need to dig. Like the older I get, the more I'm like, maybe we don't need to dig super deep into that stuff. I think if it's directly impacting your ongoing view of the world, kind of your limiting beliefs, I think you should. But in general, a lot of times you just go, I don't know what it is. I cast it on the Lord. I leave it behind. I forgive it, forget it, whatever happened. I don't know. And move on into the new things. It's like Paul, not looking behind, and pressing on toward the prize. But he did look behind every now and then, because he would look back and say, I'm the worst of sinners. I'm the least of the apostles, blah, blah, blah. But he pressed on, and he left all that stuff behind.
Yeah.
And press on.
I think Thomas à Kempis, he said, a humble knowledge of yourself is a surer way to God than a search after deep learning. And I think maybe one of the ways that, recognizing these patterns of what, when we tend to get sad, when we tend to get frustrated, or August and November were months for me, where anger was August, and angry August, and discouraged November. When I came to recognize those, it helped me kind of, I really think, lean into God in those areas. So maybe it could actually be a blessing when you begin to recognize those patterns, and you don't just ignore them. I'm going to push through, but go, where's this coming from? God, what is this? What are you trying to show me about you through this? I guess the season could be a way of leaning into more of a fullness of understanding of who God is and what he wants to give us. Yeah.
And don't overlook the possibility that it's just something physical. I've been eating too much sugar, so I'm having that sugar crash or something. It's because it's not everything that happens in our life is something deep and profound and spiritual. Sometimes it's just, you need to take a nap.
Thanks for listening. Please consider sharing this with your friends on the platform of your choice. For more from Joël Malm, visit joelmalm.com. For more from Rick Malm, visit rickmalm.com. Our podcast music was produced by Alex Burleson.